Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 12 minutes now with Mike talking to us today about ITasCode and all the necessary things to shift cyber left. That's going to be a great discussion today. And if you want to share, you here, put your name and your company as a comment so we can highlight you on the screen. Thanks so much for joining. We'll get started in 12 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 9 minutes now with Mike talking about ITasCode and how do we enable the shift left of cyber in DevSecOps. So stay tuned. We're going to get started pretty soon. In the meantime, if you want to share you here, put your name and the company you're with in the comment section so we can highlight you on the screen. Stay tuned another 10 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. Thanks for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 7 minutes now. Stay tuned. We're going to be with Mike talking about ITasCode and how to shift cyber left. Lots of great questions today. Of course, if you want to share you here, put your name and company in the comment section below so we can highlight you on the screen. If you have a question, start with Q so we know it's a question. We'll get started in about 7 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Chalon. Thanks so much for joining this episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started about 3-4 minutes now. Thanks so much for joining. If you can put your name and your company in the comment section below so we can highlight you on the screen. And if you have a question, make sure you start with a Q so we know it's a question for Mike today. We're going to be talking about shifting cyber left and what is ITasCode. So stay tuned. And if you have not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel on youtube.com/Nicolas Chalon, please do that so we can make sure you get the last video. The next video this week will be about zero trust. And if you missed my post this morning on the debacle that's going on at DoD with this and the implementation of zero trust, by this check the link on LinkedIn here, or check my profile. That should be something that should resonate with you guys as well. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. Today with Mike joining us to talk about how to shift cyber left and ITasCode is going to be very interesting. A lot of people struggling still with the cyber side of the house, and how do we make sure that cybersecurity is embedded inside of the DevSecOps teams. A lot of people still think of cyber as different teams from the development side of the house, and so that's a very interesting kind of subject today. Also, of course, wanted to remind everybody that if you have not yet subscribed to the show on the nickofTime.tv, you're going to be able to find the mailing list so you can get emails for the announcement of the next videos. The next video this week will be about zero trust. I think you're going to like it. It's a really deep dive on zero trust and what zero trust really is and what it is not, and giving you a couple of examples of how we deployed the largest implementation of zero trust in DoD and in the US government with the cloud native access point. In fact, I just released today a pretty significant post on the situation that's going on with this and zero trust. So if you missed the post, you should probably go check it out. I think you're gonna like this. Unfortunately, this refused to reuse the cloud native access point work we've done at the Air Force and Space Force and Platform One, and created their own stack from scratch, and awarded a contract to Booz Allen, and really it seems it's not going very well. And so I think that's really where we need to stand up and act as a team to make sure that the government is starting to stop wasting taxpayer money. That's getting very concerning, knowing that, of course, China is now waiting for us to figure this out. And in the meantime, stealing IP and access to data across the government because we can't figure this out. So a very critical piece of capability with zero trust. So make sure you check the post and react to that. And maybe I think it's time to get Congress involved as well. So I'm going to be reaching out to testify on this matter as well. We also launched a new website. We just wanted to give you the link. It's in the nick of time .us, like United States. If you've not seen it yet, please let us know. It's not the final version yet, but it's getting there. So please check that out and tell us a little bit what you think about this website here in the nick of time.us. Also, if you've not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, do that on youtube.com/Nicolas Chillon. Thanks for the first 1.15 thousand subscribers. Pretty exciting. We beat the target of 1,000 like we wanted. So I wanted to thank you for that. Like I said, next video on Zero Trust coming this week. And then, of course, the next episode of In the Nick of Time will have Pradash, the Chief Information Security Officer of CloudBees, will be joining us as a next guest Tuesday at 1 p.m. So that's going to be a fun discussion too with Jenkins and all the stuff that's going on. Jenkins being now 11 years old, has also a lot of tech debt, and how are they reinventing themselves and how are they innovating in a world where no one is waiting for them to figure it out. So it's going to be an interesting discussion next week with our next guest as well. Today, like I said, and if you missed that video of the Valley of Death that we published last week, please check it out. Pretty exciting to see a lot of comment and feedback on the two ideas we're pushing on, pushing DevSecOps from day one to those R&D teams, and also becoming smart money by having government dedicated transition managers to be responsible for being the matchmaker between the programs and the sabers, so teams can find proper customers to grow and scale and get the right kind of feedback to build better capabilities and not doing it in a vacuum. And of course, the government streamlining and facilitating the access to some of these program managers as well. So if you missed that, go check it out on the YouTube channel. I'd love to get your feedback also on the SpaceX versus F-35 video here. We can bring you up on the screen if you want to share kind of what your thoughts were after you watch those videos and what we could improve. Always trying to do better. You know, this is not my my background doing videos, but I think we're getting there slowly but surely. All right. Special guest today, before I bring him up on the screen, Mike is a VP of DevSecOps at Sophos, and he had a startup called Refactr that was acquired by Sophos in August 2021. He was the co-founder and CEO and chief architect of that company. Of course, he started his career at the Air Force and working on F-15 fighter jets, and later as a cyber engineer. He was active duty as well, and he created his first company back when he was 19, which was a retail computer repair store. And since then, he has founded multiple companies, and he's a speaker at multiple events, and of course, published great articles. If you Google his name, you're going to find a lot of these great publications. And of course, he wants to be the world's coolest dad for his 6 years old autistic daughter. And his spare time is creating augmented reality applications, which drastically can help autistic children. And that's so great for me to have the chance to have Mike on the show. So let me bring him up now. Here we go. Welcome, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So I gave a pool background of what you've done. You've done so much in the last many years since you started after your first company when you were 19. You were not 15 like me, so I still win, but that's okay. You know, but
yeah,
still very impressive.
Yeah, you win that, but we were both still teenagers, so
yeah, that counts.
Pool
right?
of years.
Yeah, no doubt. A lot of parents will be pretty happy if they hear their kids tell them that they were going to succeed this way. So so the first question we always have when we have guests on the show is for them to tell us a little bit about your journey. So we'll let you do that.
Yeah, thanks. So as you had stated, I started out my career in the Air Force active duty, and then I decided that I wanted to start my own company. I had the entrepreneurial spirit at 18, 19, started my first company, which is a computer repair shop a few miles off of base, and then transitioned to the Air National Guard as a cybersecurity engineer and worked and had multiple companies, different companies from managed services provider company to cloud and cybersecurity consulting firms. Built a workspace as a service product a few years back. Didn't time it well with the market. If it was right before pandemic, it would have been perfect. But was able to pivot to building out Refactr, which is the DevSecOps automation platform that, as you mentioned, was acquired by Sophos last year, where I'm now VP of DevSecOps. So super excited about the stuff I'm doing at Sophos, and I've had a very interesting career going from fighting on, I like to say, physical weapon systems on F-15s that I worked on to digital weapon systems around different systems as a cybersecurity engineer, and then coming over to the other side of the world, the developer world, and getting my bachelor's and master's in computer science. So it's been an interesting journey, but I'm one of those people that has to know or try to know as much as I possibly can. So if I'm going to build something, I am the subject matter expert of what I'm building, and wanting to make sure that I'm taking in feedback from various folks across the full spectrum of technical talent, which is really what we're trying to achieve with DevSecOps in general. And super excited about obviously what the DoD is doing with DevSecOps that you started, but also what we're doing in the commercial world as well.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And so, funny enough, you kind of coined the term ITasCode, and I always want to know more about where that came from and what is it exactly.
Yeah, so when I was getting into the developer side of the house and working in different DevOps tools and kind of in the DevOps life cycle of automation, I really wanted to see everything outside of pure play app dev also included into this process, and really truly try to achieve what DevSecOps is. So ITasCode is really, as you like to also say, everything is code, where if you're getting your infrastructure, your configuration, any of the security, and then complementary things like integrations all become code, you should be able to follow the same agile principles as you would in DevOps. That's not just necessarily applicable to cloud native, but really should be looked at holistically. If it's code, or if it's software defined, it should fit into the same process that we've been doing for 10 plus years in DevOps and for 20 plus years in agile software delivery. And so ITasCode is just this thought process behind, the shift from data centers and rack and stack hardware to software and software defined everything. And if we're going to do that, the only way we're going to be able to modernize is to be able to think about IT and the full life cycle of IT as code. And that's where that term came from. So I'm a huge proponent of that shift, but it's also a very difficult type of paradigm that you're having to look at as you're going from kind of point solutions now trying to think about everything holistically and heterogeneous, and wanting to make sure that you can support both traditional and more of the legacy IT systems, and then obviously the more modern cloud native stuff that's out there too. So you have to think about everything, because if we just shift fully to all the stuff that DevSecOps wants us to realize is more of the modern stuff, we want to look at also how we can decouple some of that automation we can create and apply that to other more traditional IT systems in place, because everything lags. Not just in the commercial world, but as on the government side too, many years behind anything we're trying to modernize on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you talked about a lot of key concepts, right, to enable scaling across large organizations. You look at GitOps and the infrastructure as code, configuration as code. If you talk to companies, everybody claimed they're doing it, right? Yet they have built products that have fancy dashboards that enable you to make changes in production without making code changes first and pushing back into Git. So you have all these fancy cyber tools, particularly, and also management tools, right, that are enabling you to connect to some fancy UI, and then you can make changes. And unfortunately, still to this day, most of these products are pushing those changes directly in production, bypassing any kind of change management enforcement through multiple set of eyes on Git, and kind of drifting your desired state from Git, effectively making sure that you're not doing GitOps. And so that's a massive struggle, particularly for cyber teams that are used to either connecting to SSH and updating and patching some packages or some dependency or whatnot. And also teams that are using all these fancy, allegedly facilitator tools that enable you to connect and have a fancy UI to make decisions and make changes in production. But most of these tools are not pushing those changes back to Git. So that's a big challenge, right?
It is. And so specifically when you talk about cybersecurity and where cyber's been for the last 10 plus years, if you look at a cyber team and say, hey, here's a Git repo, I want you to aspire to this particular process leveraging CI/CD, a lot of cyber folks' eyes are going to glaze over, because it's not what they've been traditionally supporting. To your point, they live in nice UIs and in GUIs, and so the shift to modernizing to, I like to call it, as I said earlier, ITasCode, and thinking about DevSecOps, we really have to think about how do we get cybersecurity started to be a part of it. And it's not just about visibility. There's so many products out there that provide visibility, but the reality is we need cybersecurity to be a part of the process, and it has to be collaborative. And we also have to think about how we can provide technology to them at where they're at. And so the upskilling piece of all of this is super important, but you can't just say, hey, here's some Git repos, here's a CI/CD system, figure it out. We have to figure out more sophisticated ways to be able to provide technology to them that's at where they're at from a skill standpoint. And then also thinking about how we get DevOps and developers involved to be able to work with them and, as I say, collaborate so that we can help them to be a part of this. Because a lot of the push around different tools and technologies, to your point, is they're nice dashboards, they provide visibility, they're point solutions, though. They themselves can make changes. And we want to look at this as, again, something holistic where you have different teams in collaborating. I don't think it's a shift to pure play DevSecOps teams, because I think that trying to add another domain to DevOps engineers is a very difficult proposition, or developers. I think we have to think about how each team can take responsibility for what they're creating, and thinking about automation and building, pipelines is building them like software. And if we have folks involved to do that, then we can think about this in a way that we protect and deploy software, to your point around using Git and using GitOps, thinking about different methodologies and approaches to how we can have all these different teams cohesively working together. But that requires technology that can meet each of the teams where they're at in the full spectrum of technical talent.
Yeah, and you mentioned obviously teams using fancy UIs, and then of course you have the other side of the house in cyber, teams mostly doing CLI, right? And so many of these teams know all the command lines and all the nooks and creaks of Linux and so on, right? But now they would have to move to a GitOps universe, and they've never probably committed code into Git at all, if any, but maybe some, who knows? But most people probably have not, right? And so completely different landscape. Also having to now understand the source code side of the house and understand what changes they would have to make in Git. Let's say you need to update a dependency version. Well, you have to go into maybe a Docker file or some YAML or some code to go and make that change. Some tools, right? You talked about the fancy UIs facilitate that change by obfuscating it through UI, and you just effectively click a button. That would be pretty easy for these tools to stop, pushing the changes straight to production, but instead mapping the change to Git repos and then do a merge request, and then that merge request will be approved in Git by the team, right? So that would flow back to a normal GitOps process, and the UI will still facilitate kind of the adoption of and understanding of the Git interaction, but it will be very streamlined by some UI. But the training portion of all this, right? You talked about the complexity of training. I've yet to see really anyone starting to bring any type of training when it comes to cyber teams on the concept of GitOps.
Yeah, so I think we need to take a step back from even GitOps. So kind of to your point, if cybersecurity practitioners and engineers are living command lines, building scripts, I think we need to shift the definition of what a developer is first, so we can start thinking about broadening out the term of developer. And I hate using like the term citizen developer, because it does take a certain type of person even to build scripts that work, right? But then being able to build and encapsulate those into a consumable format, and then tie that into, say, a GitOps process. But I think we have to start earlier in how we position technology to this type of user, so they can be a part of it. And then the other piece of it is the tools, right? So you have your third party commercial tools, you have your open source tools, and so we have to think about how to also balance open source versus commercial tools and where they make the most sense, and then how the cyber teams are supporting them, and then how those tie into the existing workflows that organizations have. And I think that's the key to all of this, is being able to have them be a part of it, but also make sure that we're not trying to unseat technologies that are already in place, like, the next guest you have next week, like Jenkins or CloudBees or GitLab or GitHub, and think about how technologies can be tied in so that they can be a part of this, and then look at how these can tie into more of to your point, the GitOps workflow. But I think that's like so far beyond what we're talking about in cyber, that we have to like figure out how we start with them first. And I'll say, like, I made a decision when I was building Refactr where we supported Git, but we also wanted to support the ability just to pop in your scripts right there in the UI, so you could start using and start building around how you would build pipelines. And I think that's critical, because you want folks to start kind of upskilling themselves by learning. Because if you think about this, DevSecOps requires some computer science fundamental skills, and you have to think about those skills and how they'd apply to how cyber would use them, but then also be able to support what the DevOps and developers have been doing for 10 plus years. And so how do you meet them together and bridge that gap to be able to have both of them working cohesively together in the tools that they use and love on a day-to-day basis, and not disrupt either side of that spectrum of that type of talent.
Yeah, no doubt. So that's a kind of a step-by-step concept, right? Because you see, of course, when you look at training, right? I was trying to find the right kind of training to send to some cyber people reaching out to me asking for help to understand, infrastructure as code, configuration as code, and GitOps. A lot of the stuff is designed for developers. Honestly, I don't think a lot of the content is actually designed for cyber guys. There's one certification, right? The Certified Kubernetes Security Specialist, CKS, but that's really deep into Kubernetes and pretty complex, pretty the hardest that I know in kind of cyber related things. So most people couldn't just start there and get a certification done first. So they would have to start with some baby steps. So I guess I understand your notion of, hey, you wanna start bringing also the ability for these teams to get used to those concepts, so they can get to the more advanced, more mature piece, right? But when you look at DevSecOps, right, how does all of this map to it, right? Because you have all these phases, all these people talk about shift left, both for testing and for the DoD. Of course, we have all the operational testing communities and all these different teams that often are doing assessment at the end of the food chain. How does this ITasCode and the whole concept of everything we just talked about map back to DevSecOps?
So that's a great question. So I think there's a map left and then there's a map right. So we have to think about both sides of that equation, because it's not just about shifting cybersecurity left, but it's also how do we get the ops folks to consume what the DevOps and security folks create, or even be a part of the equation too, or part of the process. And in DevSecOps, I look at DevSecOps as, holistically enabling collaboration across, DevOps, Sec, and Ops, or security and Ops teams, and then thinking about how you can introduce agile automation into these teams and have them all be a part of the process and take responsibility over what they're working on and creating. And so, if you can enable them through technology, which is what I was doing with Refactr, now Sophos Factory, to be able to support both sides. So I know you've talked about like low code on another talk, and I think we have to think about both, more of the high code, or the coding side, and then the low code side. Both sides have to be supported. I see low code kind of falling on its face if all you're doing is abstracting away everything for the user, and then the developers, the DevOps engineers don't want to even touch it because of the fact that it abstracts so much away. And so I feel like we have to delicately balance between both sides there in order to map this whole IT as code to DevSecOps, and think about this as these different teams working together and building modern solutions that are driving outcomes for the organization through the technologies that they're trying to tie together, and then future proofing also as well, because the push towards cloud native and Kubernetes may be here today, but we're also looking at what are the next technologies that we need to support too. And so we really have to think about how we can future proof this for teams as they're building and iterating on the more modern DevSecOps solutions that they're creating.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, right? It's it's a problem that's been going on for years now, right? And so when you look at technologies coming out, right, and God knows, I have a lot of startups and companies reaching out to me every week to show me new cool concepts, often thinking they're the first one to think about something when they're not, right? And so when you look at all the cyber technologies that you've seen on the during the last years, what kind of cyber technologies help you kind of streamline that whole model? Like, is there tools that come to mind that say, hey, this is actually a game-changing capability to help the shift?
I think so. I think if we first look at the existing tools out there, I talk with a lot of different cybersecurity vendors, and I think if you see a lot of the vendors that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years, they're slowly trying to catch up with this push towards DevSecOps and IT as code. And so they're trying to figure out, do I make these acquisitions? Do I create net new technology in my organization that can help support this? And so I look at the different technologies and put them into different buckets for use cases, and then think about how those use cases could be building blocks around the different solutions that I'm trying to create. So if we take like IAM, for instance, and look at different products in IAM, I want to, any of those technologies, I want to be able, kind of your point earlier, be able to support them from a CLI, or is there an API I can tie into, put it into more of the programmatic type of pipelining system that I can incorporate these in, or other things like infrastructure as code, supporting technology, technologies that I'm using already in DevOps, and then being able to tie in the other tools. So for doing infrastructure as code, I want to be able to then tie in an infrastructure as code security tool into there to be able to check my policies or compliance and so on. So when I think about cybersecurity, I think about the cybersecurity tools that I can couple into what I'm already doing with other tools, and how I can support them holistically around the type of solution that I'm creating. And then I think about everything as building blocks so that I can incorporate. So if I have IAM, if I have infrastructure, if I have compliance assessments that I need to run against the infrastructure I create, then if I want to create integrations, I do all that in the same process so that I have a very iterative and continuous way to support the solution I create. And that's something that we don't typically see in cybersecurity products themselves. They're very much point solutions for one very particular sliver of what they're trying to do. But that doesn't work for what we're trying to achieve in DevSecOps, because we have all these different technologies, cyber and DevOps included, and then we have to tie them into a bunch of different external systems, and then we have to support them over time too, because it's not like, oh, we have this project, we want to build towards the end of this project, like you were kind of mentioning earlier around like ZTNA or other things. It's like, okay, that's great, but we need to be thinking about what's next, because by the time you finish any of these large projects, what you've done may be close to or already obsolete, and you have to start thinking about the next thing you're going to incorporate in. So
Yeah.
For me, it's like you have to always be thinking about what's next. And so when it comes back to your questioning around cybersecurity technology, that's really what I have been trying to achieve with Refactr, is to do that, or now Sophos Factory, which is to be able to support the long-term capabilities. It's not just about the near-term use cases that companies are trying to support to build solutions, but it's also looking at how can I incorporate anything that's net new. And that's really kind of a foreign concept in the cybersecurity world that we really have to get past and really be thinking about this longer term. To your point also about, keeping ourselves ahead of nation states or bad actors or adversaries, we have to be thinking about this type of concept and how we can be very agile and how we're leveraging technology to be able to be as many steps ahead as we can of our adversaries.
Yeah, I can tell you that by the time DISA is done implementing Zero Trust according to their schedule, which of course they're going to miss the schedule, but even if they actually meet the schedules they released, I can tell you Zero Trust will already be obsolete by the time they finish doing it. So that's a very scary thing, and kind of the velocity of IT is increasing, and I think people start to realize, right? You used to have more time to figure things out, and now the time is getting compressed and compressed and compressed, right? And so when you look at some of the enablers, right, you talked about, of course, some of the great work you built, but what would be the top 3 cyber products that you've seen, whether it's commercial or open source, I don't care, that you see are accelerating the journey of teams to DevSecOps? Is there like a top 3 that you got?
There is. So when it comes to secrets management, I really like HashiCorp Vault. I think it's a great product. I think it's also something that cybersecurity and DevOps teams can use and support. When it comes to other tools, obviously in the HashiCorp bucket too, like Terraform for infrastructure as code. And when you compare that to like the cloud native templates, it's always nice to have one technology that you can support across.
Cloud agnostic, yeah.
Cloud agnostic, exactly. And then the third would be Kubernetes. I like Kubernetes. I built Refactr. We built Refactr on Kubernetes. But it's also, to your point, like a very complicated technology. And so I also view it as not for everything, but I do believe that depending on the use case and what you're trying to accomplish with it, it's a really solid technology to be able to deploy your applications, again, cloud agnostic, and be able to also support kind of more of the hybrid approach. And we ended up picking Kubernetes because we had to support tools to be able to run inside of the technology, as opposed to going like pure play cloud native, using like Lambda functions or other type of approach to do that. And so we looked at, how do we support a lot of the tools? Because as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the technologies out there are CLI driven too. So you have to be thinking about how you can support those type of technologies, both on the cyber side and the DevOps side. And that's why I picked it. But those are kind of my top 3. I like a lot of tools.
There's so many, right?
Yeah.
I was looking just, infrastructure as code security tools, right? And of course, you have a lot of the legacy guys that are doing scanning of code, trying to do some IC scanning. Usually not very good, right? And then you have the more cloud native guys, right? Doing a lot of stuff. You have the smaller guys and the bigger guys. Accurix, you have Systrix, Nick, all these guys. There's a lot of players, right? And it's kind of the problem, right? You look at the CNCF landscape map, and you end up having a gazillion products and companies, which effectively compounds your cyber problems, right? Because you're bringing more dependencies, more issues, right? There's this big push of software bill of material, right, with the new President Cyber Executive Order, and many people are jumping to bring SBOM scanning and also management of SBOM and understanding the risk of the software you're using and dependencies, and kind of getting a better understanding of the overall risk of what you're doing. And what do you think, when you see this executive order, right? And I helped write it, so you can blame me later. But, you know, often what I find is we have what I would argue is a good idea or logical common sense decision that we're making, creating some type of policy or some type of publication or whatever, right? Something official, and often it turns pretty badly because of either misunderstanding, misinterpretation. People turning it into something that's not good, right? I've seen it, for example, with the Contus ATO memo that I drafted before leaving, where I wanted to try to make the Contus ATO a DoD-wide official, recognized, well understood, this DoD CIO thing. And then DoD CIO added a paragraph before signing saying, well, all Contus ATOs have to be approved by me before I sign off and before you can have a Contus ATO, despite the fact that, by the way, they've never done a Contus ATO before. And so how would it know if it's good or bad? But, that's a whole different problem. And you can see, like, someone coming up with a normal, decent idea turn into something pretty bad. What are your thoughts on the I had a discussion this morning with a VC, right, that was asking me, well, the government is asking to do this SBOM scanning. They wanted to invest in one of the companies doing SBOM scanning, right? And they were asking my opinion. And, those guys were like, well, someone could just go get an open source scanning tool, and even if it's not very good, it's fine because it's just checking the box, and that's good enough. But it kind of defeat the point as to why we did it, right? We wanted to have the right SBOM with the right details and the right vision, right? But you can already see people trying to find sneaky ways to get around it. Is that kind of the world? We just have to get used to the way the world behaves?
I hope not. I really want to push change and innovation around this. I think that you're correct. Like in order to achieve the C status and like CATO, we have to be thinking about truly being able to provide continuous. And you can't do continuous if it's just a checkbox every 6 months or a year or whatever timeline you're kind of checking back in and getting a reassessment on your technology. It's got to be something every time you're pushing out code that everything gets checked, which also comes into play with the SBOM. I like to look at the SBOM as it should be a solution bill of materials. I think we're at a point where SBOMs were really kind of looking at the different packages and libraries that were included in your code from an open source or ones that you created yourself. But now we're kind of looking at what else can we include in to be able to include, say, the CI/CD pipeline, the tools that you're actually using to release your software. So everything that goes and encapsulates with it. And so I think we're kind of at a place now where we're just thinking, we're seeing the executive order come out and talking about SBOMs, but it's still very kind of rudimentary in what our expectation of it is. And we should be thinking again, as I mentioned earlier, like, what is that supposed to look like down the road? And how do we, again, future-proof ourselves from it becoming obsolete by, to your point, just, hey, we checked the box, we have an SBOM now. Oh, okay, but do we just need more data about what we're releasing, about our software? Do we need to think about more about what is everything that's supporting the release of our software? And now also thinking about it not just being about app dev, but about everything that we're doing in IT or ITasCode. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but I just don't think it's far enough. I think we continue to need to improve how we approach this. And so that C should consist of everything that you're trying to get in your ATO, and it should include everything holistically and be able to do that in a very short-term cadence every time you want to be able to have it rechecked. And I think that's where we need to get, but everything is lagging so far behind in the government. It's going to take a long time for us to get there. So if we can have some framework around it, I think we can be in a better space to be able to support it. But if we don't have a really solid framework on what that means, it's going to be very tough for us to be able to develop around that. And I even see things like, for FedRAMP, like OSCAL and other technologies where there are strides made to, hey, we just don't want another report that can be automatically custom generated. how do we tie this in to the tools and technologies we're using? Because that's where we're going to get the most value. And then can we future proof that? So if one tool is what we're using today, but another one is the de facto tool tomorrow that everybody's using, can we just swap it out? And I think we have to start thinking about that type of interoperability and functionality to, again, future proof ourselves in these type of initiatives.
Yeah, and you mentioned OSCAL. You know, I had a great demo on Monday of a product called Reg Scale, Reg like REG Scale, and I had never heard of it before. And a couple of people that I trust told me, "Hey, this is pretty good." And I can tell you, their vision of what they call Reg Ops, kind of DevOps, but for regulations, is kind of game changing and integrates with OSCAL and bring kind of a turnkey kind of continuous regulation framework enforcement / mapping, and it's just pretty cool. So you should check it out. But the other point you kind of brought up, is kind of the lack of maturity, right, of the SBOM. The same VC that was asking me questions about that scanning SBOM product was also wondering about what happens, once all these companies have a bunch of findings and struggle, right, to address them and all this tech debt, right, and that reminded me of what's going on with Atlassian, right, where I've been pretty vocal about it because obviously the DoD is a big consumer of Atlassian. As a public company, I would expect companies to do much better. I remember 2 years ago fighting with the leadership there when they were trying to justify why they had dependency that were 7 to 12 years old with 1,400 CVEs on Jira and Atlassian and Confluence alone. I've never seen a product with 1,400 CVEs in my whole life, let alone something where you end up putting quite a lot of information. And you've seen over the years quite a lot of 0 days and critical CVEs released on Confluence and Atlassian, Jira, right? And so that kind of makes me upset, right? You're charging quite a bit of money. At the same time, you're telling people that you're gonna shut off the on-premise deployments because you're gonna move to a SaaS model. And then they had an issue where they deleted hundreds of accounts of some of their customers, and it took them 3 weeks to restore the data lost. You imagine you're hosting your stuff on a SaaS because you were mandated to move from on-prem to a SaaS, and those same guys end up deleting your entire suite of Atlassian data, and you're left with no tool for 3 weeks when they're trying to restore the data magically. This is just a shit show, right? I mean, you wouldn't think this is something that could happen in 2022. But my point of all this is, you see the move of Atlassian pushing back to the SaaS model, right? My take was, hey, most people were like, well, it's probably because it's more money, right? Which is not false, but it's not really true because the on-premise stuff was actually more expensive. And it's also a recurring payment. So it's not like you're paying one time. It's a monthly payment, just like the SaaS. So it's not really a money thing. My take was by moving from on-premise to SaaS, then people have no access to the bits of the software and don't know how bad the CVs are, so they don't have to go through explaining why they have 1,400 CVs on the product. So do you think, with that adoption of SBOM, all these companies putting their hands in the sand, right, trying to hope that no one is going to know about all their dependencies and CVEs, what is going to change in the market now that these companies are going to try to do business with the government and they're going to have to provide those SBOMs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there has to be more transparency around that, even if you're shifting from supporting on-prem to SaaS. It doesn't mean that you didn't all of a sudden magically don't have to.
You don't just trust me? Come on, I have a beautiful SaaS. It's right here.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is,
but how do you verify? I mean, you can verify it, right? That's the beauty of SaaS. You trust, but you can verify, right?
Exactly, and then you have to bring in some sort of something continuous, and then be able to report that to your user base so they know what's actually going on behind the scenes. So if you're still going to do business with the government, you're going to have to disclose and go through the process anyway. So it's kind of I think it's more, and I can't speak for Atlassian, but I just know from an on-premise and a a SaaS-based type offering, is that support is always kind of one of the biggest issues of how do we support this product. You're right though, like if you have the product and you're able to scan or do things with the product yourself, then you're able to see things that you may not be able to see with SaaS. But I'll also say from our SIBR that we went through with Platform One and Space Camp, a good portion of it was to do the on-premise, because of the fact that trying to support a SaaS-based offering for customers isn't always the best option. And so being able to have both options for different types of customers, I think still imperative even in 2022. Yeah, it is. And so I don't think trying to go to pure SaaS play is the best option. I will say though that it is different when you're a public company and you have a pressure on you for things too. So there's again, can't speak for Atlassian, but there's always things behind the scene that you're seeing go on that could be pushed from other reasons. But kind of back to your question around like SBOMs and other things, I think if you're going that direction, you need to be as transparent as possible. And so there's going to be expectations that you have to provide things to users. And so I don't think you're ever going to get away from that as long as customers are pushing for that type of transparency. And I think that's what we have to do as consumers to do that. I also say though, is taking an agnostic approach so that you can say, okay, well, maybe Atlassian's the thing I want to use today, but maybe I want to use, GitHub or GitLab or something else. So thinking about things, again, more agnostic and holistically, where I can say, let me have the option to pick and choose, so I'm not locked in. And it's always difficult because at some point you're going to be locked in when you pick particular vendors. But if you can figure out ways
to move too, right? I mean, it's not like you can move off Jira and Confluence overnight, right?
Exactly. And how much do you have invested in it too, right? Because even if you move to something else, is it as good as the product that you have? Because there's other things to think about too, like how long users have been in the product trying to move to something different. So it's always the context switching that's always difficult for users, especially if they have a ton of experience in particular products. But that's just kind of the byproduct of widely adopted products in our industry, right?
But what do you think people that used to get away with those kind of CVEs, right, inside of products, once they have to give that SBOM, right? Once a company like Atlassian or whatever, right, doesn't matter, but whatever company has to give that SBOM to the government, and if they show up with the 1,400 CVEs or whatever, right, I don't think you can get away with that, right? I hope people will be like, wait a minute, this is what's your plan to fix it, right?
You should be doing your own due diligence on your own cybersecurity posture internally and coming out, and you shouldn't hide things either, but there are a lot of good tools and technologies out there that could help you cut down on your CVEs. But at the end of the day, to your point earlier, everything is increasing exponentially from a velocity standpoint. So we shouldn't expect that if you release an SBOM, there's going to be zero CVEs or anything else that accompanies it. But you should be able to talk to it and say, hey, we may have
a plan.
Here's our path. Yeah, here's our plan. Here's our path to fix these. And this is our policy and procedures on how we're able to react to the SBOMs that we release. And I think that's going to be super, super important for any company that's pushing out SBOMs. But it's going to be, a process, and it's going to be painful. Like, having to be transparent and be accountable is never an easy thing, but it's a necessity, especially with all of the past attacks that we've had in the supply chain or software supply chain. We have to be very vigilant when it comes to this and be very transparent.
Well, in the last 2 years, in my government role, I forced pretty much, because that's what it is, but I had to force about 7,500 CVEs to be patched upstream, and so I had to work with a lot of companies to do that. And funny enough, in the Atlassian example, their initial policy was stating that because they mitigated somehow the CVE, they claim, it's not in the code path, which of course no one can prove if that's true or not, or whatever, right? And so you have these CVEs being mitigated, And so their policy was saying that, well, if it's mitigated, I don't have to fix it or update the dependency, which I think is nonsense, right? Because you're compounding the tech debt, and then, how do you know if all these CVs combined, the malicious actor is not going to find a way to use them against each other to escalate privileges or do different things, which, most humans don't have a brain capable of trying to compound 1,400 CVs risk. I mean, this is just, no one can tell you, yeah, I know, we're fine. In fact, they're not, right? And so I'm the one who kind of forced them to say, well, even for mitigated CVs, you have 6 months, which I think is way too long, but at least better than 7 to 12 years, right? And I told them, you have 6 months to patch those, or we're going to have to DATO the product. And I can tell you that that's the only thing that worked,
Yeah, and I think we have to also be thinking about how we can overcome any sort of vulnerabilities that are found on looking again. This goes back to like how we build more of these modern DevSecOps solutions, and where everything becomes building blocks, because it's easier if you have chunks of things that you're trying to resolve. And a lot of the CVs that are out there aren't necessarily your own software, right? They're third party. They could be OS, they could be cloud, they could be included libraries. And so you have to think about how you're able to accomplish these and the different building blocks of what you're creating. And that's where this whole shift to ITasCode is super important, because it's very difficult to do if it's all hardware based. I don't have the tools in place. How do I fix systems that have been in place for, to your point, like 7 to 12 years that maybe I haven't done anything to? So what am I going to do to bring them up to speed? Or if I do, it's going to break everything, right? And so you have to think about, this comes back to our conversation about continuous too. You have to start thinking about how to resolve this continuously, and also kind of chipping away at it as well. I mean, if it's glaring and you have 1,000+ CVs, then yeah, you got to try to figure out how to chip away faster. But you have to also think about the systems and the technologies you're going to put in place to make sure as new ones come out, because this isn't like we were talking about earlier, a checkbox. This is a continuous thing you absolutely have to be thinking about and be able to have an answer for, where you can continuously solve for these and make sure that you're resolving these type of issues in an ongoing type or continuous type manner.
Yeah, I have a funny other example where I was with CloudBees, right? And CloudBees also with Jenkins being 11 years old, of course, and Java, that always has a bunch of CVs, right? So they had a bunch of findings, and it was pretty bad, and not as bad as Atlassian, but it was pretty bad. And so to the point where we almost had to DATO it. And so I had a pretty engaged conversation, we'll say, with CloudBees, and they did it. To their credit, they they went after the tech debt and started updating the bits. But of course, you have a bunch of plugins too. So Jenkins is very tough, right? You have all these plugins made by third parties, so you have to go and reach out to all these people. But so it's a problem, right? I get it. And funny enough, they were tackling the tech debt and solving a lot of the CVs, and I was getting excited, and we're getting to be ready to say, yeah, you're in good shape, again. And then decided to release new features, and then the new features had new dependencies with a bunch of CVEs, and I had to reach out to the leadership, to complain again, and they're like, yeah, we never thought about making sure that as part of the process of picking new dependency, that we scan it to make sure we're not bringing new problems, right? I'm like, really, I have to be the one telling you this? Like, really, this is not like a common understanding that it's pretty good that you take some time to pick the right dependencies before bringing it into your product. So many developers still today, right, believe that because they use open source bits or even paid libraries or things, they're not liable or responsible for those. But everything you ship in your product is part of your product. You picked it, right? You're responsible at the end of the day for whatever the compounded set of issues would be. So that was always interesting to me, that lack of continuous, back to your point on continuous understanding of risk, and making sure we're not adding more risk when we're trying to solve already all these existing CVEs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do think, though, sometimes there is the cumulative effect of, I add an open source package in that works for me, but then there's all these dependencies that I have to trace down into what I'm adding in. And sometimes you're not aware of that. And so again, that comes back to like the tools and technologies that you're using that can help you there. And sometimes you need to use multiple tools because you can't, one tool may not be just satisfy the exact requirements you need. And so you need to be thinking about kind of a multi-tool strategy depending upon what you're trying to scan out there too. And there's nothing wrong with that. So that also you can kind of compare the different results as well across different products, so you know exactly what you're getting, because a lot of products out there are fairly old and haven't really been innovating all that much. So they're most likely missing things that some net new startup decided to take a different approach to it. So it's always good to look at the the incumbent vendors and the new ones to see maybe there's net new technology out there that they're working on, or other things like you said, like RegOps or other SCA tools or other things that may actually do a better
disrupt
job.
the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that there is very little in terms of competitors to Atlassian. I mean, GitLab has a decent set of collaboration tools. GitHub and Microsoft a little bit, but I mean it's not great. But you would think there would be hundreds, right? I mean, it's a pretty broad collaboration market, and yet not much is going on the Atlassian competitor side. So if anyone on the show today wants to share, maybe on the comment section, some of the names, I'm trying to find options to have diversity of options, and even smaller new startups will be great. So I wanted to send that message for everybody. Now we talked about the fact that cyber guys now have to get used to code, and maybe a little bit less of CLI and more of Git, right? Does that make them developers? I mean, are they, if you can write a bunch of YAML and whatever, right? Edit a Docker file and change a few versions here and there, or I don't know, pick a different dependency or whatnot. How do you, do you think all this kind of dependency management, updating of bits, updating of packages, all this stuff is getting more and more automated with infrastructure as code and more scalable across, dozens of Linux servers and VMs and containers and things? Is that a job that's going to be replaced by AI or just automation? And those guys, what's the future for those people? Do they have to reinvent themselves to become GitOps security people, become a kind of a specific type of developers, or what do you think is the future for those people?
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think we have to look at kind of redefining the definition of developer. So we can look at if a cybersecurity practitioner or engineer is building scripts or working in other tools like Ansible, can those the automation content they've created be packaged up and put into more of the DevSecOps pipelining process? And I think the answer to that question is yes. But then we have to kind of broaden our definition of developers, and this goes back to the whole ITasCode type of thought process, because a lot of the technologies and solutions that you're trying to create aren't necessarily for just pure play app dev anymore. It's now thinking about other pieces and parts of technology, things that you wouldn't have thought before around, like, hey, can I deploy a firewall virtually and a configuration against it and drop that data, or deploy some infrastructure behind it? And so now you start thinking about what cybersecurity teams are supporting currently. So there may be a firewall or network team that needs to support that, and then moving to more of the cloud native firewalls supported too. But if you take the same approach by saying, I can create these scripts, I can develop in these tools, and to your point, if it's YAML or whatever, and then can I package those up and turn them into repeatable bits of pipelines that now I can work with my DevOps counterparts? I think the answer to that question is yes, but we have to move the needle so that we can get them involved inside of the process, and also not thinking that just because I use a CLI or I build scripts that I'm not actually a developer. And so that's where we have to kind of shift this whole thought process on. And even with that shift, not every cybersecurity practitioner or ops person will become hardcore software engineers. But I think if we can start pushing the upskilling narrative by saying, hey, if you learn these tools, if you can learn this technology, if you can work with your DevOps and developer counterparts to be able to at least start providing cybersecurity tools and cybersecurity use cases in a format that they can use, I think we're going to be able to shift this narrative to be able to include them as developers. I don't think that's the same as like a citizen developer. We're like, well, anybody in your organization can develop, because I don't believe that's true at all. But
no, that's a job. Developing is
yeah,
a job.
exactly. So, but I think we
Yeah.
can shift the left, but I think it's going to take culture shift inside of organizations to have these different teams working together. I also believe it's going to require technologies that can meet both of the teams where they're at. So we're not just expecting cybersecurity practitioners to now become DevOps engineers or vice versa. DevOps engineers now have to include cybersecurity. I think we have to figure out a way to be somewhere in between so that I can support them both. And I think that's the way we're going to solve this. And then the last point is the ability to support existing systems, because both cybersecurity and developers or DevOps have different technology they need to support. And so how do you cohesively intertwine those together so they can both actually be a part of the narrative? Because you see a lot of cybersecurity initiatives where their stuff is being done in a silo aside from the developers. And it's like, oh, well, how do I know what each team is doing? And it's not just about, hey, let me show you in a dashboard what we're doing. It's like, I actually need you to take responsibility and have a seat at the table to actually create and build things that we can use on either side of that spectrum.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because obviously most people refuse to admit when an industry is going to be completely wiped out through automation or AI, right? Elon Musk made many statements saying that 70% of the jobs that we know will be automated within 10 years with AI. Obviously, most people like to believe it's not going to happen, and that's okay. But the fact is, maybe we should be paying attention to this with the adoption of GitOps. And look, there's going to be a lot of tech debt, and it's going to take years for this to become the norm and replace the existing legacy way of doing things. But the fact is, if I have to pick for my kids, that are 3 years old now, right, what to do. And of course, I'm not going to give them a choice, because who give them no, I'm just kidding. Of course, they're going to be able to pick, but obviously they're going to pick what I tell them to pick. So if you had to tell them, where to focus, right, what would that be? I mean, obviously, for an ops guy today, do you think at least, the very least, at minimum, understanding Kubernetes and really becoming a kind of a Kubernetes SRE / guru, would be a great way to make sure you have another 20, maybe 15 years in front of you as an ops guy?
I think so, but the engineers or the ops folks that I've seen become successful, and I have some on my team, are the ones that have shifted from being like a sysadmin type persona to being more of the DevOps. But I think we have to be thinking about how you can move towards leveraging tools and then other technologies. I think it's a leap for somebody that's, a sysadmin on, servers and desktops and networking equipment to make the leap from that purely to like Kubernetes or anything cloud native. I think there has to be a crawl, walk, run approach. And I think you have to kind of start looking at different tools and technologies. I also like to say that you have to learn computer science fundamentals. You don't need to go through and get a computer science degree, but you need to at least learn the baseline of what you're getting into so you can learn the concepts of even like different tools. Because there's tools like I mentioned earlier, Ansible, that are great for starting to get an automating, that you can start moving towards understanding these computer science fundamentals, leveraging a tool like that. But you have to start living within the tool, start figuring out how you can apply that, do everything in very small bite-sized chunks so you can start learning and iterating. It's like developing an app, right? Like you're not going to go and just code the entire app and then come back and go, okay, now I'm going to run it and test it and see if it works, right? You're going to start iterating incrementally on it. And you have to be thinking about the same way as you're starting to learn new technologies and incorporating what you're doing. I do think, though, that not every ops person can become a DevOps engineer or a DevSecOps engineer. So we have to be thinking about, to your point about AI, like how is AI and automation going to help supplement it? But if we all look back all the way to like ATMs and tellers, like it didn't remove the teller from the bank, right? Like as it was said it was going to happen, but it did kind of rework and augment how that type of person operates within a bank. And so we have to be thinking about it, and it's probably going to be much bigger adoption of AI with automation. So I think there's definitely going to be a world where software is creating software, right? But we also have to be thinking about how we're able to augment humans into that equation, and it's not just going to be like, oh well, one day everything is just going to be driven by AI. It's going to be a kind of a delicate balance. I don't believe it's just going to be a Skynet type situation 10, 20 years from now. But I do believe that we're going to see a massive amount of uptick in how AI is applied to automation, and there's good reason for it, and how it's going to be able to really help us when it comes to technology, or really the velocity of how we're adopting.
Maybe we need a learning camp, to send some ops guys to go through a 4 months journey of step-by-step learning to get all the way to Kubernetes. I don't know how we're gonna bring all these people to the modern world, but
and it's also like the supporting things around Kubernetes too, right? Like you need to learn the technologies around the cloud and what are the tools that you're using and how do all these things work together, because there's a lot of pieces and parts around Kubernetes that is very useful to learn when you're making that journey to get to that point. And as I mentioned earlier too, Kubernetes may be here today, but how long has Kubernetes been around? It's been around for a while, right? So what's the next technology? And so we need to be able to train them up to be able to then be quick to have the aptitude to pick up whatever the next thing is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's why, self-learning is essential. And, I'm actually working on a curriculum. I'm partnering with a couple of foundations that you all know, open source foundations, right? And so I'm creating an executive curriculum for DevSecOps because I couldn't find anything that was good enough, right, for execs to understand why DevSecOps matters, why what all the key concepts of containers, Kubernetes, service mesh, continuous monitoring. Why does it mean for an exec talking about 05, 06 plus all the way to the GS 14, 15 SES, and of course the commercial equivalent, right? It's not just for DoD, but kind of the middle frozen layer plus the top, right? On why all these things matter. And so I agree with you. I think the learning and the self-learning and enabling people to learn, and that's what schools don't do very well, in my opinion. I feel that not only the curriculums are so far behind. When I tried to help universities to do a DevSecOps curriculum, they were complaining that I wanted to update the curriculum every year. They wanted to freeze it every 5 years, right? I said, you can't do 5 years, that's for sure. Maybe 3 if you're crazy, but certainly not 5. And so that's why I ended up not working with most of the big universities, because I didn't agree with the velocity of updating the curriculum. So I think self-learning is going to be the key, right? I think that's going to be how people are going to have to evolve and learn. And so we need to educate and train people how to learn by themselves, ideally, as fast as possible. So I guess there was a great question. I'm going to bring it up on the screen here by Zach on what about integrating the developers into a purple team approach, where of course, if your aim is to address an AI/ML approach, they really could help innovate those solutions. So shifting those guys to be part of the purple team to also help in kind of pen testing and building more tests and whatever things around the proactive and reactive cyber defense. Is that a good shift for some of these guys too?
I think so. I think like we look at the ability to automate some of the things as you mentioned, like pen testing or attack simulation. We have to think about like shifting the narrative on where we're incorporating these into the process. But this is also where it comes down to how you're building your solutions and how you're incorporating your developers in there. So I've had some interesting conversations with different folks around this, and like MITRE, around the different ways to incorporate even like attack simulation software or other things in there. But the key though is that you kind of have to take a step back and know holistically and look at the life cycle of what you're creating, and then be able to incorporate that into the process. Because I absolutely feel like there's a place there, or feel like there absolutely is a place for this. And I do agree with like the ability to apply an AI ML approach, so that you can have, you know, your stuff be tested and build larger data sets to get better data from the testing of those solutions. But I think we have to, like I mentioned earlier, crawl, walk, run. I feel like this is like the run stage once you've dialed in everything when it comes to DevSecOps, to be able to incorporate this into the mix. But if you build everything in a much more modular approach, it makes stuff like this approach easier to incorporate into what you've already created.
Yeah, no, spot on. All right, we're gonna shift a little bit topic, but still very much part of what you went through. You obviously sold your company to a larger group, Sophos, right? That, you know, that was a pretty exciting journey, I'm sure. Picking the buyer, you know, trying to see if it's going to be a good fit. I sold, you know, 12 companies, but I also sold 187 products over 20 years. So I know how to not get attached too much to my babies, at least the software babies, right? Not my real babies, but how do you do that, and what lessons did you learn, and do you have any regrets?
So from a kind of a timing perspective, what I've learned is, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, I've had multiple companies, so I've seen where, you know, market timing is super critical. But I also learned that when you're selling your company, there's really only two good times to sell it. It's before you've raised the VC money, so that you can maximize the value for not just the founders, but all the employees of the company, or you're going to raise a few rounds and then sell the company. Now, obviously, there's outliers there from that standpoint. But I think from my perspective, it was all a matter of kind of timing, and also what the acquiring company is looking for from a technology standpoint is super critical. So what you're building needs to be able to map to whatever the narrative of what they're trying to, you know, not just tell their customers, but also looking to the future and what they're trying to do. So from where we sat when we were talking to Sophos was, you know, it just became the right time, the right product, and then the right company to do it with. But it's also there's a little element of luck involved too when you're getting to those type of conversations, and where you sit at in the process of when they're looking for things to acquire too. So I would say always be looking for, you know, how other companies view what you're doing. Don't be uncomfortable with the fact, if you're doing something, especially if it's fairly novel in the space, to try to adapt your own narrative to work within what they're looking for. But it just comes down to, as I said, the right place, the right time. I think from a lesson learned coming into a bigger company, keeping the company as it's, keeping the company, the startup Refactr, as a team was super critical for us on integrating, versus everybody just being dispersed to other teams across the org. And, you know, just making sure that we can adapt to the culture and it makes sense for us as a team, and how we can integrate, because at some point you will be assimilated to a certain extent. So you have to be prepared for that. That being said, you know, I was in the Air Force, so I know how to assimilate to an extent. But I think you just have to be prepared for that as you become a team within the constraints of a larger machine. And you will lose some velocity, because there's going to be processes and procedures and other things that you have to take into account as you're starting to, you know, work yourself into a bigger machine. But at the same time, there's, you know, the upside of being able to do a lot of the things that you couldn't unless you either raised a huge funding round or figured out other paths to do that. I say we were in a really good position, because we ended up getting that phase 2 cyber contract. So we were able to use that kind of as the intermediary funding vehicle as we were going through the process, which was awesome. And I'll say the last point is it's really cool now that you can be grandfathered in with your SIBRs. It wasn't always that way, the Small Business Innovation Research contracts. So it's nice being able to take that into Sophos and being able to use that as a vehicle for acquisition as we're building out our Fed practice. So I think it's super critical that the DoD is jumping on board. But as you also point out in your the DoD Valley of Death, like there has to be better systems in place to be able to go from that phase 2 to phase 3. So I think it's a great vehicle if you can use it, but I think there has to be a lot more support. And I've seen like companies going for phase 3s, we haven't yet, and go in and talk to the unit, and the unit has no clue what a phase 3 contract is. And so they're having to educate them on, hey, this is what SIBR is. This is what a phase 3 is. This is how we can engage with you. And so that really has to change. So I'm totally on board with what you've thrown out there from the approach standpoint, because we absolutely need resources to be able to take responsibility to make sure companies can move through the stages of the SIBR program.
Did you find the Air Force helped you find some good programs to push your tech stack to, or you had to find them yourself and then reach out and explain what SIBR was, or did you have some introductions made through AFWorks or whatever? How did you get in front of some customers, I guess?
So we're just wrapping up our phase 2. I think because of the fact that we were with Platform 1 and then moved to Space Camp, and then have been working within kind of the more forward thinking that we have a path forward there. But I also say like the SIBR can be used beyond the DoD too. So being able to get into different agencies is super critical. Yeah. I just happen to be lucky because we just started our Fed practice. We hired our VP of Fed. So we're actually going to put time and effort and energy behind that. If it was still left to just the Refactr team, it would be a lot more difficult to do that. I will say, though, to your question, we've gotten some introductions or kind of working with our current TPOCs on how it can work within what they've worked with us on. But we still have yet to be able to get introductions outside of that group. And I think that's super important. Now, since I'm ex-Air Force, and I know a lot of other folks in the Air Force, it makes it a little easier for me to do connections where I need to, but it's still a lot more work than it needs to be, especially if you're trying to figure out where this technology can be used by different programs. There should be a path forward to do that, as opposed to, as we mentioned earlier, hey, check the boxes because you just finished your phase 2. Okay, well, what's the plan to be able to go to phase 3? And there should be a continuous approach to the contracting piece too, on how you can continuously get in front of different programs of record or other units, and not just in the DoD, but across the broader federal government.
So did your SIBR effectively enabled you not to do a round of funding by having that money, I guess?
It did. It at least gave us a path. We also did revenue-based financing, so we were able to use that, plus the revenues we were generating. So we ended up not having to raise a round, which was really awesome when it comes to an exit.
Yeah, I mean, having a round of funding is important. It's not.
Yeah, especially when you're building. Yeah, exactly. When you're building a product that is focused on enterprise and government, it's very difficult. And you're building a platform versus a point solution. It's almost impossible to pull that out with your traditional round of raising VC funding. So we just happen to get lucky.
Yeah. So you didn't mention any regrets. What, you can't have no regrets. There must be one somewhere.
The only,
it doesn't have to be who bought you. It could be
no. I don't have regrets around that. But I think sometimes when you sell your company earlier, you always kind of ponder, like, if I did raise that funding and if I did take it, because what I am seeing is the VCs that I talk to, when I talk to them, had no clue about the DevSecOps market. And so now I see manifestos and theses around
they'll come to me.
I'm like,
they'll come to me.
So I'm just like, oh, okay, 2 years too early. So I do think about that, but I think because
how long was it between you when you founded the company and you sold it? How much time?
About 4 years. So
4 years.
Yeah. So an average startup is about 7-ish years towards
Yeah.
acquisition. And then I was reading on TechCrunch the other day that, you know, before you get a institutional round of funding, 97% of startups fail. So
Yeah.
we were in that, like, working to raise that first institutional round, but also looking at, you know, what do we do at that point in time? But I get to your question about kind of regret. It's not a regret. It's just more, I ponder, like,
Yeah.
what
What could have happened if you kept it?
we exactly, and would it have gone the funding route? But at the same time, you know, funding changes how you approach things and can kind of chip away at your autonomy as a startup too, depending on
Yeah.
the VC that
It's
you
not a
pick.
it's not a maybe.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a fact. Yeah. There's no maybes there. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So you never
that
know. I
would,
mean, it's
yeah.
yeah. And so you've been now in the company, the new bigger group for how long now?
About a little over 9 months.
9 months. So what are the so I helped a lot of companies, right, get acquired by a larger group. We always had a good understanding of what would happen, and we're gonna be, separate. We're gonna have autonomy, and then honestly, most of the time, it doesn't happen, right? And so often after a year or 2 years, also maybe it's too early to know, but I've seen so many companies ending up being wasted, right? So big companies buying smaller companies initially to innovate. Sometimes I doubt if they were really trying to innovate or just kill the competition, and not innovate. So buying the guy that was going to make some noise and just kill it, right? Pretend they were not going to kill it and then kill it anyways, right? You've seen it with Red Hat and what's the operating system that they bought? I'm blanking on it. Core OS, right?
Oh, Core OS, yeah.
Yeah, and of course they didn't realize that they would be the Core OS founder, right, would be creating is other OS, and competing with them now. So it's you never underestimate kind of what's going to happen, because people are not stupid, right? So anyways, that's I'm sure that's a big lesson learned for Red Hat as well.
Yeah, for sure. I also saw many years ago. I don't remember, a company called Cabiza that was doing VDI with Citrix, where they bought it and then they basically end of life it when they realized that they didn't want to start cannibalizing their Zen desktop and Zen app products. But anyway, I think from my perspective, the technology build is pretty unique. So we're obviously priorities change from being a startup to being in a bigger company. But I think from a vision standpoint, we closely aligned with what Sophos looking at with CTO. And so from my perspective, things have been tweaked and adapted and changed internally. But I also think there's a piece of it, of the market, also kind of getting to the place. I mean, we were bought relatively early compared to the market, what we're talking about with VCs in general. So I think you have to think about how the market's starting to catch up, and then where this, the technology we built can be incorporated into the overall market, and then also kind of the ecosystem play, the Fed play, and so on. So I think it was the right time, the right place. Where we're at, we're still an internal team, which is our own team internally, which is great, under a bigger team. But I think from from my standpoint, obviously time will tell, but so far so good.
Yeah, and the OS I was talking about is Rocky Linux, right, with Greg
Rocket.
Kurtzer. Yeah, Rocky is kind of killing it right now with, and he's kind of also one of the guys that keeps creating companies, right? He has Singularity, he has CIQ and Rocky Linux now. So,
and is that the one that's replacing or like trying to replace CentOS? Currently, yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah, that could be a whole nother discussion. But yeah, it's pretty interesting seeing the OS different flavors of Linux and trying to gain the market share when others are being end of life like Cent. So we'll see how that shakes out over the coming months and years.
So we did kind of answer a little bit the last question I had for you, but you mentioned that effectively the CBER allowed you not to do a funding raise, which could drastically impact your your exit numbers, because you got to save a lot of equity there, right? By not having to dilute yourself with either a round of funding or a convertible note or whatnot. So what kind of lessons learned do you have for startups, right? Trying that debate, a lot of people debate whether or not to even try to get a SIBR.
So I think SIBRs are much more difficult and competitive now than they were. I mean, they were always competitive, but
Yeah.
3-4
There's
years
a lot
ago,
more traction.
when there is. And I also think different programs too. So, if you look at AFWorks, they get a ton of submissions every submission cycle. But SpaceWorks is the Space Force's comparable to AFWorks, and they're not, they're just starting to get started. So it's all a matter of where you can have the most impact from what your technology can do for whatever branch, or agency of the government that you would apply for it. I do think that there are VCs are coming around to be more inclined to look at SIBRs as something valuable that can supplement any investment they make. I talk to a lot of VCs who are like, SIBRs don't count. They can do nothing. They don't do anything for your bottom line numbers. And I look at it and go, okay, well, if it makes your money more valuable to the company, or we can do more and develop, do more on the R&D side to get things net new in with additional dollars, I think there's a large amount of value. And then the other piece of it is what the value is to the acquiring company too. So with the recent, your near recent changes to how acquiring companies can realize a SIBR, I think there needs to be more education on that for acquiring companies, because I think a lot of companies are in the dark on, oh, you have a SIBR, that's cool. Oh, you have this, DoD customer that you're working with to, adapt your technology for dual use. What does that actually mean, and how does that impact my company, the acquiring company? I think that's super important on being able to have some more education around how that is. And then the last piece is, as we had talked about, the support of the SIBRs, because I think unless you're engaged with folks that know not just the SIBR process, but have the connections to other folks in the DoD, or you have connections yourself, SIBRs are great tools, but without the support that would go along with it, they're very difficult to transition. And so that support piece is going to be super critical for the viability of how the technology that comes out of these SIBRs is actually adopted by the DoD or other agencies that have the SIBR program. And so I think that's going to be super important, not just to a startup's exit or how they can be valuable. Because if you can gain customers from the SIBR, well, then all of a sudden those customers become more valuable, but we also, or make the company more valuable. But we also have to think about the federal space as being a valuable piece of what a startup is able to accomplish by bringing them as customers into the dual use, as opposed to being opposed to that startup because they have a federal customer. Like, that should not be something that VC should say, oh, I don't want to do anything about that, especially if it's dual use. So you have to prove commercial traction to even get to the next phase of a SIBR, or at least show that you're going to have commercial viability, which is super critical.
Yeah. You're spot on again. So this was a lot of great information for the viewers. I'm sure they loved it like I did. Wanted to thank you, of course, for joining us. As always, I give before I tell the public here what the next episodes are going to be for next week, I give the last meaningful words to you. So I'll do that now and let you share your thoughts, and then we'll give them the dates for the next episode. So over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so I would just kind of words of advice, especially when it comes to cybersecurity being a part, and cybersecurity practitioners coming on board to DevSecOps and getting into ITasCode, is really look at the ability to learn some computer science fundamentals, shift yourself to start picking up tools that are in the DevOps and cybersecurity space, and then think about how you can start contributing to provide the value from your side to your DevOps or dev counterparts, and really look long-term to be very collaborative in your organization when it comes to not just cybersecurity, but really trying to achieve DevSecOps longer term.
Here we go. Awesome. Well, wanted to thank you, Mike, for taking the time again and joining us today to share your thoughts on security and DevSecOps. Wanted to remind everybody to subscribe to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Nicolas Chelon. You're gonna see the next video on Zero Trust. It's gonna be pretty cool, and then we have a video every week. If people want to tell us what topic we should be focusing on for the next video, please comment on LinkedIn to tell us what you think we should be focusing on for the next video after the Zero Trust video for next week. Also, the next episode next Tuesday is going to be fun. It's going to be, we talked about Cloud Bees a little bit today. We're going to have the CISO, Prakash of Cloud Bees, who came from HSBC. So he came from the banking world before joining Cloud Bees. And Prakash will be on the show next Tuesday at 1 p.m. So we're looking forward to having you guys again. In the meantime, everybody stay safe and healthy and keep the good fight so our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China in 20 years. Thanks so much.